to our webinar on when to use an EOR, the essentials and commercial considerations. For those of you who haven't attended one of our previous webinars, my name is David Wall, and I'm one of the founders of Sintra Global, and I'll be chairing the session today. Just in terms of housekeeping, the webinar will be live for about 30 minutes, and we plan to cover off what is an EOR and how does it differ to other types of contracting relationships with workers. When is it optimal to look at using an EOR as a hiring solution? We'll also look at when perhaps it may not be a good solution to use an EOR. Then we'll turn to some areas of regulation and compliance and look at when you need, how these impact and, the considerations around using an EOR. And finally, we'll look forward into the future a little bit to look at some of the changes at national level that are being brought in terms of local legislation that may impact the operation of EORs. There will be the opportunity to ask questions throughout the session, and these can be submitted via the chat function, and we've already had a couple of questions submitted already. So before we dive in, I'd like to introduce two other speakers on the panel today. So first, I'd like to introduce my co-founder, Julian Christmas. Julian, do you want to just give a 1-minute overview of your background and perhaps a little bit about Sintra Global and the types of customers we work with?
Yeah, thanks, David. So just as a quick intro to myself and my background, I've got a public accounting background, worked for Ernst & Young a long time ago, and I've spent about the last 20 years working with originally technology firms, but latterly less focus on technology, but more focus really on businesses who are looking to hire in other countries, looking to build their businesses internationally, particularly with a focus on hiring. So hiring people, building teams. That's kind of the focus of our business, advising our clients on how to go about hiring a certain profile of employees across different countries. And that's really how we come to be well versed in the issue of employer of record, because our advice necessarily takes in, is employer of record the best option under the circumstances? And by the way, what are the alternatives? And that's some of the stuff we'll cover today, David, which is, here's EOR. Legally, what does it look like? What are the alternatives? And what does the future look like? So hopefully that's a bit of background on me. Final piece on that. My specific role in our business has always been providing technical guidance to our clients. So particularly when EOR comes up, advising them specifically on whether EOR is the right solution, whether direct employment is a better solution or something else. And so I personally am quite well placed to have a discussion around EOR just because it's part of my day-to-day work, frankly, with our clients.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Thanks, Julian. And secondly, delighted to be joined by Alexander Schlicht from the law firm Osborne Clarke. Thanks for joining us, Alex, today.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Perhaps you could give us, again, just a very short overview of your background and some of the work that Osborne Clarke does as a law firm.
Sure. So Osborne Clarke is a law firm. We just celebrated our 275th anniversary, so around a bit. And originally a law firm from Bristol, expanded throughout the whole UK. And then we are now over 25 offices, mainly in Europe and in Asia. We are a full service law firm, so we provide everything from employment law, which is my main focus, up to corporate or regulatory advice, tax advice, and so on. So whenever you have a global legal problem, we'll be able to solve it. I personally am from the Cologne office, the German business unit. So I worked there for approximately 7 years, and currently I'm seconded to New York. So I help global companies, especially US companies, expand or reorganize their organizations. as well as resize and upskill and downskill and introduce new technical new tech in their business related to employees, as well as IP and data protection from an employment angle. And EORs are one of the topics which comes up especially a lot when we talk to clients about international expansion or other alternatives for their global workforce.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Alex. So we've got a great panel today. So myself, I've been supporting businesses going international for about 20 years now, mainly working alongside Julian. Initially, however, though, I started off as a lawyer, supporting fast growth businesses, and then subsequently, founded Syndra Global, where we've supported probably about 500 companies into roughly about 75 different international locations. I would say that only in the last 5 years or so, employer of record solutions have really become a way of hiring workers. And this was really accelerated due to the high demand of hybrid working, COVID, and then the gig economy. And whilst there's a myriad of options out in the market now in relation to EOR, it's still a relatively nascent market, and there's lots of options available. And it's really worth looking at what an EOR is, how they work and how they don't work, and some of the pros and cons around them, because it's not a one size fits all. So that's really like the thrust of this conversation today. So I think the first important distinction to draw is kind of what is an EOR? And I'm going to ask Julian if he could kind of just walk us through how an EOR operates and how perhaps it differs from some other kind of hiring models that are out in the market. Julian, if you're okay to walk us through this slide, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me take you, David, and I think Alex will probably have something to add. We got one slide too far there, thank you. And I think Alex will have something to add afterwards as well. So an EOR is an organization which, in essence, will hire employees for you in other locations. So if you want to take on an employee in another country and you want to use an EOR, that employee will sign an employment contract with the EOR and will be on the payroll of the EOR. Your business will have a contract with that EOR, but it won't be an employment contract, it'll be a commercial contract which determines how the relationship works. But your employee will, by definition, be an employee of the EOR and not of your business. So legally, and just in terms of sort of practicalities, very clearly different from what we would consider the main alternative to be, which is a direct employment model where your business is actually the employer of the end employee. They have a direct relationship with you. They have an employment contract between themselves and your business, hence the direct employment sort of reference to direct employment. So EOR is like a fully outsourced model where you're not just outsourcing payroll services, you're actually outsourcing the employment relationship to a third party. So in our world and in the advice we give, we're mainly balancing EOR, so employer of record, against this direct employment option. And one of the things this slide does is make reference to PEO. So because we work a lot with US clients, we no doubt have some US companies on the webinar today. It's important to draw parallels, but also distinguish between EOR and PEO, because they're often those terms are often used interchangeably, and I think has led to a lot of confusion in the US and a misunderstanding that EOR is the same as PEO. So in the US, PEO is a reference to a co-employment model which sees your employees, your business's employees, on, it is a third-party payroll. It also involves provision of benefits and other things, but they do remain legally your employees. hence this kind of co-employment reference. They're definitely your employees still. EOR, they clearly are not your employees, although they are your resources to use and draw upon, and you can use their expertise and they can deliver services to your business. They are fairly and squarely employees of a third-party organization. And quite often that third-party organization is not actually part of the EOR business that you're engaging with, because there's a lot of supply chain activity in the EOR space, which means that although you may be signing a contract with a big global EOR firm, your employee may be engaged locally to some totally unconnected EOR provider who just happens to be a specialist in that country. So PEO is not the same as EOR, and I think that's gradually becoming clearer in the market. But it's always important for us to distinguish between those two. As I said, PEO is specifically a US arrangement of co-employment. Our work outside of the US is usually it usually revolves around distinguishing and making decisions between EOR and direct employment. Alex, I know you wanted to add some extra comments and also talk about how independent contracting falls into this sphere of international hiring. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you already summarized most of it. The main difference is that they are not your direct employees. It's not a co-employment, and it's also not the typical independent contracting consultants which we used to see in the past before these EORs actually emerged and came up globally. So that's the main distinction. With regards to the independent contracting, I just want to add, there are some EORs who try to add that as an alternative solution which they can additionally offer under their EOR model. It just makes things a little bit more complicated and difficult, and the contractual relationships have to be you have to secure your IP rights and so on even more. But we'll get into that, what that means later on.
Perfect. So now we know what an EOR is and how it distinguishes itself from other kinds of hiring models. When should you look to choose an EOR for your business? Now, so this is not an exhaustive list, but it is kind of 4 very clear scenarios, I think, where an EOR may be a good potential option for you. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to canter through these. So let's just look at them. So EORs can be quite cost effective. So when you look at an EOR versus, the typical setup of a legal entity in a particular country and the associated costs for running and keeping that entity compliant, an EOR can be a really neat solution, particularly in countries where you've got to pay up the share capital as well. And Julian, correct me if I'm wrong, but China is a good example, I think, where you have to pay the share capital up, which can be, 30,000-40,000 pounds on top of, the operational setup costs. So an EOR would be, in a scenario like that, and in other scenarios, it can be a really neat, cost-effective solution. Where you've got lower level roles, so not senior execs, not subject to permanent establishment type triggers that may be impacted. So I'm thinking now around software developers, admin support, roles where you can turn the tap off quickly if you don't want that resource anymore. An EOR could be a really good solution.
Just to add to that one sentence, there have been also governments which have seen that this is a problem. For example, Mexico, a couple of years ago, they said the staffing solutions have to be limited or cannot affect the core business. And you cannot have your CEOs, we'll go into that later as well, I know, but you cannot have your CEO being the one that is under this EOR model, basically, if that is kind of your core business in Mexico. And obviously globally there's other rules in other countries, but this is something you should take away as a general rule. A very important aspect, David.
Great, thanks Alex. So final 2 points. Speed. So where EORs can really make an impression is, if your organization has found some remarkable talent and you want to hire them really quickly, ahead of your competitors, EORs can be super quick in terms of that engagement model to get that particular worker hired and onboarded and effectively working, for your organization. And the final point is around a convenient interim solution. So often we get into conversations with prospects or existing customers, and there might be an M&A or an acquisition, some kind of M&A kind of deal. And there might be a situation where new entities have got to be created, and there's a lag between, the completion of the deal and these new entities being established. And EOR is actually a really good solution for that as well in a lot of scenarios. So let's move to the next slide, where we talk about perhaps when you might want to pause a little and think about whether an EOR is the right solution. And so a good example of this is where you've started to hire people in a particular country, and that team in that jurisdiction is starting to increase in headcount. So typically the rule of thumb is about 5 people where you should start to consider thinking about setting up an entity. And Julian, I know I'm straying into territory now, which this is more your technical knowledge, but perhaps you just talk about that PE risk here and triggering that.
Yeah, so it depends on the market as to where that size limit sits. So one thing that a lot of people don't acknowledge is that it's possible to hire people in pretty well every European country and lots of other countries besides without a legal entity. So the trigger point in the UK, for example, I mean, I would personally argue that if you want to hire one person in the UK, EOR might not be a good solution, but certainly 5, absolutely. There are, you mentioned China before, David, countries like China or Brazil where hiring necessitates a legal entity, where setting up a legal entity is not just time consuming, but incredibly complex. I would argue that you could probably go as far as 10 through EOR. If that's, and Alex can talk about the legalities again, but if it's okay to do that and you're not triggering any unintended tax consequence, so creating permanent establishment, then 10 might be the right number in some markets. But it is very much about, and this is a lot of the advice that we give, and Alex, no doubt the advice you give, which is there's no rule of thumb here. Let's what's the market, who are you hiring, how many of them are there, and what's your commitment to that market, and out of that data pops what we would consider to be the better solution.
Yeah. So I'm going to, as I say, I'll canter through these final points. So, and again, this is often, circumstantial, and these are the scenarios that we've encountered in the past a lot. So, we get prospects or existing customers coming to us that are operating in a highly regulated environment, so banking or financial services, and EORs often are not equipped to provide that necessary compliance environment. Okay, so EORs, if you're operating in a regulated environment, you need to think about and have that conversation with an EOR provider about actually can they do this in the right way. If you've got ambitious growth plans and you know that you're going to be hiring 30, 40 people in a particular location, then it might be that because your culture is really embedded and that you want to get those foundations right straight away, policies and procedures, handbooks, IT processes, so that everybody's on the same journey together. It might be that you just set up a legal entity from day one and you don't go down the EOR route. One of the things that we've certainly identified, and it may be that the EOR market, grows and changes and evolves, but a lot of EOR providers don't necessarily offer bespoke or customized benefits, so employee benefits for workers, and that may be a limiting factor in terms of your ability to hire candidates that you want to bring on board. And then the final 2 points is, I've already touched on culture. So culture is, some organizations really impress, the importance of culture within their organizations. And, effectively, if you have EOR workers in your organization, then they're not in your organization. They're kind of on the outside, and they're not part of the fabric of your group or your company. So that is a consideration that you want to think about. They are effectively operating on a completely different kind of way of working and solution.
And David, like an important consideration there, or an important part of that, and a simple part of it, is the employee onboarding experience, which is, if you value culture, if you want your employees to have the kind of onboarding experience that you as a business offer and expect, by definition, if you're hiring them through an EOR, then the EOR is the one who really owns that onboarding, not into the business, but onto the payroll, into the employment relationship. And we speak to a lot of businesses who find that to be a subpar experience. For them as an employer, it makes things awkward, and it makes it for a poor experience for the employees. So it's a really important thing, not necessarily to consider whether it's an EOR or not an EOR, but maybe which EOR to use, because there are some employer of record businesses out there who are more tech-enabled platform plays, for example, and they really don't afford a very positive onboarding experience for your employees. Whereas when we work with EORs, we tend to try to engage at a more kind of white glove level in terms of customer service and satisfactory experience all around.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the point at the bottom, actually, about the controlling the process, right? And so we've covered that point. Alex, I know you had something to say there, but I'm keen to move on because we've got 7 minutes left, and I know we've got a lot to talk about in the last 2 slides.
No worries.
And I know we've got some questions as well. So can we move on to the next one, which is really around compliance and regulatory issues that you really need to consider, when thinking about operating in engaging with an EOR. Alex, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind to take the lead on this, and I think we've got some questions that kind of dovetail into these bullet points as well. So as we get to them, I'll kind of raise my hand in terms of the question.
Yeah, just jump in, because when I'm in the flow, then you need to interrupt me.
Sure.
So the first point is IP and ownership and confidentiality risk. So what is the normal scenario? You have an employee, and the law in many countries already protects your IP, protects your confidentiality, and you add some clauses in employment contracts and so on, or in handbooks, but you have a safeguard level already by law. This is not the case if you are not the employer, but if it's an EOR model. So that safeguard from the beginning is not there. You will have to contractually take care of that, and you will have to take care that the EOR also thinks about your IP rights and your confidentiality risk, and not only their own. Then obviously you have a three-party construct. Sorry about that. You have a three-party construct, so you have to take care that data privacy is handled correctly in that three-party construct, where you are not the employer again, and where the law does not give you, for example, the GDPR gives you already rights as an employer to handle and process employee data by law, which is not the case if you are not necessarily the employer the same way as it would if you were the employer. So the EOR is definitely a burden to that, can be in terms of data privacy. Visa sponsorship is a good point, because there are visa. I mean, I can talk about this half an hour. There are constructs where your employees, if you want to send them overseas and want to do an intercompany transfer, where the visa regulations in that country you're sending the employees actually say, well, this is a acknowledged visa rule because you are actually sending somebody who has already been in the operation organization, sending it to your subsidiary abroad. This is not the case if you're working with an EOR, because you're not sending them to your subsidiary, you're sending them to, or they're working for the EOR. So that can definitely be a problem with regards to visas.
Yeah. Just on the visas, Alex. So one of the questions that we got in advance was around, do EORs offer visa services? Because I'm conscious of time, I'll answer that. For some do, but what I would say is that, you know, visas and the whole area of immigration, and Alex, I know that to your point, you could probably talk about it for, you know, over half an hour, and you know, there'll be people within Osborne Clarke, I'm sure, that have got real, you know, specialist knowledge around immigration. You know, yeah. It's a very, very complex area, and you know, I think EORs either outsource, you know, the deliver of immigration advice, or you know, they might have a small team of immigration lawyers that deal with it. But it's a really important consideration when selecting an EOR that you make sure that they get that bit right.
Agree. And then moving on, because in terms of time, with regards to the stock grants to employees, they are you have to think about several factors just to make it short. What about the vesting periods? Does it continue? Do these programs continue to vest when somebody's working for an EOR instead of your organization? How do you set that up from a tax perspective, and so on? So there's a lot of questions in that regard when you're working with an EOR instead of having your own employees. Next one is, what happens if your EOR is not compliant? They will always say they're super compliant. How do you know? You will have to do your due diligence and your homework there. There is a regulatory risk if they are operating on a model where they are giving you employees and they're not allowed to by the local law. When you're ending an EOR relationship, what happens then? Can you just send your employees a termination letter? No, because they are not your employees. So you will have to deal with the EOR. You will have to tell the EOR, hey, I want to let go of these and these people. And the EOR will always be in the middle of those conversations, which does make it more difficult from an operational and practical perspective. I mean, I have a couple of COOs who I'm currently advising who face these issues and who've done redundancies in the past and now face this EORs being in the middle of them kind of handling this exit situation. We talked a little bit about tax compliance and payment of social security contributions. That's obviously an issue. If your EOR is not compliant, then you might be the one who has to pay that back, or like pay those back payments to the governments, which can be quite costly. Permanent establishment risk is always something where if you have high value employees or a large number of employees in a country, even through an EOR, the local law might consider this to actually be your operation, your permanent establishment, which will trigger tax risks.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, but I want to cover the permanent establishment risk point, because we've got a question. So perhaps we can just keep running for 5 minutes if people can stay on. So this is a question that got posed ahead, and it's around. So it's a US business looking to hire a CEO in the UK for a global business, and would an EOR be a good solution? Now, this is quite a common scenario that we face. And Julian, you know, given that, you know, you're kind of in the hot seat from an advisory standpoint, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this squarely falls into the permanent establishment risk that Alex just referenced. So I gave a very quick definition of it earlier on the webinar, but the permanent establishment risk relates to the risk that you as a business inadvertently trigger some sort of tax exposure by mistake, effectively. And if you're looking at international activity, the main areas that trigger permanent establishment risk and therefore may take your business straying into inadvertent tax exposure are sales activity is always a classic one, because your salespeople are generating value and selling in another country. But the other one really is any sort of global decision making or control activity. And of course, a CEO is a classic example of somebody who has high level decision making and are therefore they represent a seat of decision making power for the business. And somebody like a C-suite level person should always be accommodated within a legal entity and employed directly, because that is the only way really to defend against permanent establishment risk, and to manage the tax risk. The best way to manage the tax risk is to set yourself up properly, register for tax, and then use things like transfer pricing and intercompany agreements. I'm sure Alex can talk about those as a way of acknowledging and managing the tax risk. It's better to own it than to allow the local tax authorities to interpret the circumstances for themselves. I think that's the best way of putting that.
Super. Thanks, Julian. Alex, there's just 3 more points. Perhaps you could take us through those.
Sure. Yeah. So you have the dependency on information provided by EORs, which is very self-explanatory. So you'll always have to question what they actually tell you, because the EORs and also the people communicating with you, they obviously protect the interest of the EORs and not your interest as being the business necessarily. And then you have a misclassification risk in case of other models. So where it's not employees being working for you in that jurisdictions via the EOR model, or where they choose to do it via freelancer a leasing model, that can obviously trigger misclassification risk. I'll just say one word about that on the next slide. And then, yeah, you also experience pushback by employees due to this 3-party construct, because they say, why am I not your employee? If you don't even have to establish an entity, but just have to put me on the payroll, what's the burden or the hindrance of having me as your employee directly and having that clean, direct relationship? We have experienced that in the past as well.
Yeah, we've had lots of experience, particularly in Germany, actually, where businesses will be looking to hire, doesn't have to be necessarily senior individuals to support their German operation. And because there isn't a GmbH in that country, there's a real reluctance by, candidates to sign up to that business. So, it is a problem in certain markets. Japan is another one where culturally it's important to have that local entity. Not everywhere, but we've definitely seen it in our day-to-day.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And if you have a German employee, just to add, the German employees will know that there's generally an 18 months period where this EOR model is generally limited to. So they will, the first question will be, what happens after that time? How are you supposed to, what are we doing then? And you will have to have answers to those questions when talking to candidates. And it just leads to a certain uncertainty with these employees or these candidates.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So let's just go. We've got one more slide, and then I think we can draw a close to this. And this is all about the future and the changes that we're now starting to see come into various local markets around consultations and legislation. So, Alex, if you wouldn't mind just walking us through this.
Yeah, sure. So my UK colleagues can definitely talk much more and more elaborately on the first point and on maybe some others as well. But so there was a joint consultation paper published in the UK in June 2023 by Treasury, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and Department for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy, which basically said they do want to address the employment rights within the umbrella companies, and it concerns pay, holiday pay, and other payments being withheld. So that seemed to have been a big issue. Yeah, I mean, if this is a topic which is hot for you, just get in touch. I'll connect you to our UK colleagues. They can send over the joint consultation paper, which is published, and they can advise on that. It's a topic coming up. You do have the EU Platform Work Directive, which doesn't affect the UK, but affects all of the European members, where basically it targets digital platforms, the Ubers and so on of this world. But EORs might be affected as well, since they do allocate work through their platform, their HR platforms, which they set up obviously to keep their own processes lean and have the highest profits. So they have quite a lot of tech solutions internally, and if that is considered digital platforms, we are talking about something where the EORs will have to look at, and where also you as a business using EORs or considering to use EORs will have to be aware of. The Netherlands proposed a new bill. I just added this because it was a recent bill added, which mainly focuses on the misclassification risk of employees and self-employees, like freelancers, contractors. So whenever there's a model which the EORs tell you, well, we also have a freelancer model, you have to be aware that there's huge and extensive rules around these topics, and the laws also changing, and not only throughout the EU, but also in the member states, and obviously globally, because many countries know that this is these models, EOR models, have to be compliant so that the employees ultimately don't suffer from this construct. So they are putting more safeguards and more rules in place, steady and slowly.
Great, thanks, Alex. There's a lot in there, and we've covered a lot of ground in just over 30 minutes. So, look, I'm going to draw this session to a close now, but I'd just like to say thank you very much to Julian and Alex for their time today. Very insightful. If anybody's got any questions, then please do get in contact with us at Sintra Global or Osborne Clarke. We will be sending out a recording of the session to all of the attendees, and it will be uploaded onto Sintra Global's YouTube channel. So it will be available to share and watch again. Look out for any future webinars which we are currently doing. Our marketing teams will be in touch, and they'll let you know what sessions we've got on, and hopefully you found it insightful today. So thanks everybody for attending, and thanks once again to Alex and Julian for being the presenters today. Appreciate it, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.